So we have the wonderful Odyssey and Oracle reemerging in its original mono configuration for the world to hear again. I'm curious what you feel makes mono so special and meaningful as it relates to this record.
Well, I just on a personal level, I just keep coming back to the fact that this is how it was mixed when we first recorded it. This is how we first heard it. And I think it has got something special to it. It certainly seems more to the point with me, but crisper, warmer. I don't know what words you would use to describe it, but I just think it's fantastic. There's been the interest in going back to the original tapes and remastering this record as we heard it way back. And we started recording this in 1967. I don't think it was released till 1968, but I just think it's wonderful that there's the interest and the commitment from people that they would want to go back and do this. And it's been a thrill for me to hear it as it was originally conceived.
Well, in a world of Dolby Atmos and myriad surround formats, why do you feel mono matters, both in retrospect and also for future generations that approach this music? And not just this record, but all records made during that era.
Well, I can only go back to what I said in the first place, that I think it's wonderful to hear records in the way that they were originally recorded. Of course, there are all these options now, but it's quite refreshing, I think. And also refreshing in one way to go back and hear records like this, but also quite important as well to hear records how they were intended to be heard in the first place. It's almost like the historical documents, if you like, that you should go back and hear it as accurately as you possibly can. Well, you don't have to. I mean, it's a suggestion. I think it's well worthwhile to go back and hear it how it was originally recorded. Yeah, so I'm sort of saying the same thing about other people as I would say about Odyssey and Oracle. For me, it's just the thrill of hearing it. And of course, there's, for me personally, all those memories come back of those very, very hurried sessions in Abbey Road, Studio 3 Abbey Road, where we were trying to make this album for a recording budget of £1,000. And we were recording so fast. And all those memories come back to me when I hear it, and especially hearing it like this.
Well, you mentioned the pressure, and of course, it was recorded in, 3-hour windows with such a severe budget. Do you feel that that pressure served as a forcing mechanism for the band to do some of its best work?
In a way, I do, yes. It's one of the things that's happening in recording now. You have endless possibilities in how you can record now. But what it means is you start to lose spontaneity. And there's, a major discussion about any little alteration because there's such great opportunities and such um, diverse ways that you can record now. It makes everything an epic decision. What are you going to do next? When we recorded this album, we absolutely did not have the time, and also the recording was very different. Then we're basically recording on 4 tracks, and you couldn't make all these decisions. You just had to get in the studio and play it, and that's exactly what we did, and we played it as quickly as possible. I mean, we knew the budget was tight, and so we took over a little small village hall, and none of us can remember what village it was, but it was somewhere near St. Albans, where we come from. And this village hall that was used, for socials in the village. And we took over, I think it was either a week or 2 weeks, and we just played these songs over and over again. So that when we got to the studio, we knew what songs we were recording, obviously. We knew what keys we were recording in, and we knew what the arrangement was, and we're just looking for a performance. And the energy of doing that, I think you can make out a negative argument about being under pressure time wise, but also that does bring out something quite special. There's an energy there that wouldn't be there if we'd had countless hours to record. That energy would not have been there.
Could you have conceived back in the late 60s and into the 70s when, label contracts required a minimum of, one record a year, sometimes two records a year, that we would land in this era where artists might take 2, 3, 5, 10 years to release records? What do you make of, where we've landed in terms of both the timelines and sort of the option paralysis that you referred to?
Well, of course, the business has changed out of all recognition from when I started in 1964. When you're quite right, I never understood this. I don't know. I think it was all records, but I can only talk about originally we were with Decca, and they wanted a single every 6 weeks. And to me, it's just a recipe for disaster. They're just they're assuring that your career is going to be short and unsuccessful, because at the same time we were touring all the time, so there was no time to write and record really, and everything just became rushed to the point of career-wise suicide really. And in fact, in this country, our follow-up to She's Not There was a record that wasn't released as a single in America. It was called Leave Me Be, and we knew it wasn't a hit record. It wasn't an A-side of any sort. And we knew that. And I'm not being unfair to the song. It's written by Chris White. It's a lovely song. But Chris also would agree. It wasn't a single, but it's all we had. And the pressure that Decca put on you, especially some of us were 18 or 19 years old, we'd just come into the business. You kind of presume they know what they're talking about. So yeah, we had to release our second single within 6 weeks, and suddenly our career took a huge dive because of that. You were asking particularly about albums, and I think to record one album a year, if you're a touring artist as well, it's very, very challenging, and very often the standards of material will suffer. If it was one thing, if I had my time again, I was under these kind of constraints of recording an album a year. And so if you don't record an album, they put you on suspension, and you don't get your next recording advance. But it's a small price to pay. It doesn't make any difference. I mean, I think I wish now, knowing what I know now, as a solo artist, when I was starting my career with CBS, I wish I'd have just said to them, well, put me on suspension. I don't mind. um, I want my time to record albums. I can't record an album and tour and record an album every year. It's too pressured, and you know that the standard of the records is going to drop.
Well, going back to Odyssey and Oracle, the majority of people, and certainly in my generation, we only knew that record as the stereo mix. What are your thoughts about the stereo mix and why it is relatively inferior to what just got reissued?
Well, I think it's got a lot to do with stereo was a very new medium in that time, and people were experimenting. They weren't um, too sure of what they were supposed to be doing. They were making it up in a lot of ways, and I think stereo's come a long way since those days. And also, we'd spent our recording budget, so Rod Argent and Chris White paid out of their own pockets to have that stereo mix done. But again, it had to be done very, very quickly. Um, I wasn't there actually. The non-writers, Hugh Grundy, Paul Atkinson, and myself, we weren't involved in those stereo mixes, so I can't give you a first-hand um, retelling of how the sessions went because I wasn't there. But I do know that it was a very new experience, mixing in stereo. And people were, that's not a very scientific way of putting it, but they were making it up as they went along, really. And so it probably would be a better stereo mix if we were doing it now. Sure, it would be better if we were doing it now.
In retrospect, do you think some of the stereo mixes of the 60s were sort of laden with gimmickry and testing the boundaries of what was possible?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Um, I'm really sorry, my phone's ringing. Is my phone's ringing? Is that going to mess up your?
I can't hear anything. We're good.
Oh, okay. I'll just ignore it. Yes, absolutely. But I mean, that was true of recording as a whole and of the industry. No one knew what was going on. Rock and roll was still relatively new, but particularly for British bands, what you would call in America the British invasion, there was something happening that nobody understood what that was really. And and in the same way with recording, it was developing. With Pet Sounds, the Beach Boys had recorded on 8 tracks. There were no 8-track machines in the UK. So even on Odyssey and Oracle, they tried actually to give us 8 tracks because they tried just before with Sergeant Pepper with the Beatles, and they'd managed to put 2 4-track machines together. But in doing that, they lost 1 track. So we were recording on 7 tracks some of the time, because I've also seen accounts where we were apparently recording on 4 tracks, but it's such a long time ago. It's really difficult to remember the details. I remember specific incidents, but there's a lot that's sort of blurred in the mist of time.
Well, from a big picture perspective, why do you feel this record remains the subject of such perpetual interest and intrigue?
I think that probably I can think of 2 specific reasons. One is I think that there are 12 wonderful songs on this album. They were written by Rod Argent and Chris White, and every song has got something really, really. They're timeless classics. Every song, and I just think Rod and Chris hit such a wonderful writing streak around this period. So that's certainly one of the things. Um, I think there's a slight mystery about this album in that it was released and really didn't get much of a response commercially or critically. And yet, over a period of time, it's been recognized as, one of the best albums of the 60s. Rolling Stone named it as one of the best albums of all time. And that hasn't happened to many albums, that it came out in relative obscurity. And then over a period of years, it suddenly seems to, or gradually, perhaps I should say, it gradually seems to have been an important piece of work. So there's a slight mystery about this album, how this happened. And I don't understand how it happened. I don't understand, because I listen to it and I think it's pretty good. I don't listen to it very often, but listen to it, I think it's pretty good. But I can read reviews of that time where the reviewer wasn't particularly impressed, and I don't know why that should be. And conversely, it intrigues me how in later years people can talk about it as a very important piece of work. I think that intrigues people, and it's the career of the Zombies as well. It's not a typical career. And of course, then Rod and I got back together again in 1999, and it wasn't immediate, but over a period of years, we realised there was appetite for the Zombies repertoire, and we started playing more and more Zombies tunes. And eventually, we were playing a Zombies show, and we thought, to be honest, we really should call this band the Zombies. People want to know what they're coming to hear, and we call that the second incarnation of the Zombies. And even the career of that band, I think, intrigues people. We started off playing at rooms at the back of pubs and ended up being inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and it was great. It was really exciting seeing that band grow. And of course, it did involve the repertoire of the original Zombies, but in a way, it was a completely different beast. It was Rod and I from the original band, but the other players, magnificent players, had no connection with the original band.
Now, this reissue is the first to emerge since the Zombies acquired the rights to its catalog. Describe what it means for the band to be in control of its music for the first time.
Well, I think all bands want to be in control of their music, don't they? But in the 60s, it wasn't really possible. The option was never available. So it is very liberating to be in this situation. And we're involved with some wonderful people who revere the Zombies catalogue, and I believe there are going to be 4 Zombies albums released in the next 12 months. So I think there'll be a lot of activity on the Zombies front, if you like, and hopefully there will be a reappraisal of what we achieved. I hope so. But it's really exciting that there is this interest in releasing the albums, and people are really committed to the cause. So I think this time round, people will hear the music with perhaps a different perception. Perception is so important, and I think over the years, particularly in America, people's perception of the Zombies has changed, and hopefully the release of these albums will help that change of perception some more.
What are the 3 albums that are coming out?
The other 3, so it's Odyssey and Oracle first. The second one is Begin Here, which was actually our first album. Again, it was recorded from memory. It was recorded in sort of 2 evenings, very, very quickly. Then there's going to be an album of the singles, and then there's going to be an album. It did come out before under the name of R.I.P. It was the end of the Zombies, and the label was demanding more product. And we'd had quite a lot of demos that had never actually been released. And so there was a period where we were filling out these demos. Some of them, we went back to them, they were really good songs. I don't know why they weren't used at the time. But also an interesting thing happened because Rod and Chris have started their second band, Argent. And so on some of those tracks, there are members of Argent playing. So it's a general sort of fade from Zombies into Argent. And for instance, there was a single released, Argent's Zombies, from this period, and it was called Imagine the Swan. It's written by Chris White, but it's actually all Argent. And that will be on the RIP album that will be released later in the year.
Lovely. Well, you've been part of every music industry format and shift that's occurred for countless decades. What are your thoughts about where the industry has landed, and how is the band making it work to its benefit?
Well, I think musically, the Zombies never followed any trends. And from the music business side of things, I don't think we ever really changed our attitudes to the music industry. I'm not a very sophisticated member of the music business. I go back to the principles we've always used to just write the best songs you can, record them to the best of your ability, promote as best you can, and then get out there and tour. So my life hasn't changed that much. I can't pretend to understand all the nuances of the music industry now. I don't. I never had. It's not just now. I didn't understand it in the 60s either. I always say this in a sort of slightly light way, that in some ways the business hasn't changed for me, because I know this might sound a bit light-hearted, but I didn't really understand it in the 60s, and I don't understand it now. And I know it's changed out of all recognition, but for me, in some ways, it's the same. I don't understand it. I have to just see it in a very simplistic way, because otherwise, I think it could really start to destroy you as an artist if you started to understand the vagaries of everything that's going on at the moment.
Well, watching the early Zombies footage, it's clear that you had a quiet confidence and an elegance as a frontman right from the start, despite being thrust so quickly into these major television broadcasts and appearances. I'm curious how you were able to pull that off so effectively.
I can't really answer that. Originally I wasn't the lead singer in the band. I joined to be the rhythm guitarist. And I've always been quite shy and introverted as a person. So when just by chance I was appointed the lead singer, this was a bit overwhelming for me, to be absolutely honest. And that's in an amateur band. So yeah, the strides that happened very, very quickly, where we're on major TV shows. I look back and do wonder how any of us managed to do that, because there's no formal training that goes into that. One minute you're playing to a couple of hundred people, and the next minute you're playing to millions of people on TV, and you quite basically you sink or swim, really. I'm very glad that you think I look in some way, I'm not quite sure what words you use, but confident, polished, or something like that. I'm glad, because I can just see, um, no, I can see someone that was, excited and to be involved in what was happening with the band. But I can also see someone who's fairly naive and didn't quite know what was going on and was just doing the best they could, really. But that's true of all bands. You literally just have to get on with it, really.
Were you secretly terrified during those early TV gigs?
I think some of them, particularly TV, I've played, with the Zombies, we've played some really in front of really big audiences. That's not the same thing. Yeah, I think TV has always been a bit of my Achilles heel. Um, and I think my performances have varied quite a lot on TV. Some have been quite good, and there've been one or two shaky ones, I think. Whether it's obvious to other people or not, I don't know, but I know that there've been one or two where I was probably feeling the pressure a bit.
Well, your voice remains in remarkable shape. What is your secret for being able to do this so effectively into your 80s?
Well, I think one of the main things is I was introduced to a singing coach, not when I was young. There seemed to be a lot of pressure on people when I was young not to go to a singing coach because they would change your voice. But I was introduced to this singing coach. I'm trying to think when it would be. I'd probably be in my 50s. And he made it clear from the beginning that he wasn't trying to change anybody's voice. He was just trying to make it more accurate and stronger. And he worked a lot with these singers who are in the West End in London. It would be the equivalent of Broadway in New York, who are in musicals and they have to sing every night. And firstly, he could tell you a little bit about the singing technique, and he also gave you a set of exercises that really you should do every day. And it's helped me enormously. When I'm on the road, I do those exercises twice a day, without without fail. I do those exercises twice a day, before sound check and then before the show. Uh, if we're not touring, I'll do them 2 or 3 times a week, and that really helps. The other thing is just looking after yourself, and it's something that no one does when they're 18 or 19. But above all, you must stay hydrated. It's really, really important to drink lots of water, eat well, and get plenty of sleep. It's just common sense, really. A bit of singing technique, if you can find a set of singing exercises that helps to warm up your voice, to strengthen your voice, then that's fabulous if you can do it. You've got to find the right coach to do that. And then just looking after yourself, really. It's, yeah, it's just eating well, drinking lots of water, and getting plenty of sleep. Because young, young bands that go out on the road, they're probably not going to do any of those things. They're going to be up all night. Not all bands, but when you're young, you want to have fun, and probably eat not very good food and forget to drink water. And as I certainly was in that bracket when I first started, but you can get away with it when you're young. As you get older, you literally your voice is like a muscle. And whereas you could run all day when you're young, as you get older, you just have to work at it a bit more and protect your voice as much as possible. So that's my sort of recipe for being a professional singer. And I've just turned 80. I'm not quite sure how that happened, but I just turned 80, and I'm still singing in the same keys as I was singing in when I was 18.
Well, how do you look back at what the Zombies achieved on Different Game from 2023 and also how it was received?
Think it was received really well. I always thought of the Zombies as a very much a touring band. We toured all the time, And I think that I look back with great pride on all of the albums that we did with the second incarnation of the band. Um, but I think that they were kind of tied into touring as well. It gave a bit more of a relevance to the band touring. We weren't always looking back at the 60s. We still played some songs from the 60s. People liked those songs, but it had to be on our terms to keep the band going. We had to be writing and recording new material. So these albums were really, really important for us, and they seem to be received very well.
Well, what do you consider some of the highlights of that second period between, I think, essentially 1990 and 2015 ahead of Different Game?
Um, well, just after Different Game, of course, we were inducted in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, which was a magical experience. It was at the Barclays Center in Brooklyn in front of 17,000 people. And I thought it was wonderful. I really did enjoy it. Very exciting. Susanna Hoss from the Bangles made a wonderful induction speech, which was very moving. And I'll never forget that evening. But I mean, with the band, highlights, we played at Glastonbury Festival, we played at the Isle of Wight Festival, we played at a lot of American festivals, and I could never remember what they were. Um, like, with a lot of American concerts that we played, there's some fabulous ones, but because I'm British, I can't remember the names so well. I loved playing at the Greek Theatre in Los Angeles. I loved playing at the Beacon Theatre in New York. Um, so there were lots of highlights with the band, and of course we travelled all around the world. We Scandinavia, all through Europe, and we played in the Far East as well. And the wonderful thing about it was that it was so unexpected. Now, when Rod and I got together in 1999, we weren't sure that anybody would really remember any Zombies songs. So the reaction that we got was a wonderful surprise to us. It was a surprise, but as I say, it was a very nice surprise. And suddenly we saw this enthusiasm and respect that we didn't realize, because when the Zombies finished in 1967, we felt we were really unsuccessful. So to start playing again and realize that there was a worldwide interest in the Zombies, it was quite breathtaking, really. Um, and it was a wonderful experience to see that second incarnation grow from just playing the smallest gigs you could ever play, and to be on festivals, and of course, as I said, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction ceremony as well. It was wonderful.
Well, what would you point to as some of the recorded highlights of that second phase?
Ah. My memory is not as sharp as it was when I was younger. Um, wow. I liked all the songs. Are you asking for specific tracks?
Specific tracks, recordings, or even just big picture thoughts, whatever you would like to share.
Well, I thought that the band recorded very well. And when we put the band together, there's no way we could know how it was going to record. We were just trying to we're just trying to find someone who was available, who would come out and tour with us. And we were so fortunate with the people that we put together, and they work so well in the studio. Mostly we were recording Rod's songs, so we're really lucky that he's can write so many quite sophisticated, great songs. We recorded quite quickly. They were all brilliant musicians, and I just remember it as a very pleasurable experience. The one that you mentioned, what was the album that you mentioned?
Different Game.
Different Game. Was that the last one or the one before? That's the last one, isn't it? That's the last one. So that was recorded in Rod Argent's studio with Rod producing. Um, Very relaxed environment and just great fun to do. And we recorded it mostly live. It's our last two albums were recorded with the band playing live and me singing live. And a lot of the solos were live as well. The only thing that we added was backing vocals. That's on the last two albums. And I think it made it so much more enjoyable recording like that. There is an energy in recording live, I think. It's just not there if you record. A lot of bands record completely separately and just send their performance into a central studio. And it works for them, but I think for us it worked best when we were all in the studio together and playing live.
Well, I'd like to explore your solo career a little. And I thought to start, I find it fascinating that a lot of your solo output, particularly at the beginning, is inextricably linked to the Zombies in terms of personnel and influences. You mentioned the Argent crossover a little bit. What is your perspective on when you shifted into your solo career and how you basically were still working with a lot of the same circle of musicians?
I was really fortunate actually. Um, I mean, I left the business. I'll just say very quickly, I left the business when the Zombies finished. The three non-writers were absolutely penniless, and we all had to get jobs. And I didn't choose a job. I took the first job I was offered, and I didn't know if I'd ever get back into the music business. But Time of the Season started going up the charts in America, and I started getting phone calls, and a particular producer approached me called Mike Hurst, who had recorded the early Cat Stevens singles in this country. And he convinced me to go into the studio. And I made three singles with him. I wasn't sure I was going to ever record again, but he just talked me and said, well, just try it. So I went into Olympic Studios in Southwest London and just put vocals on tracks that he'd recorded. And for some reason, they came out under the name of Neil MacArthur, and different people remember it differently. I certainly didn't choose that name, and I'm not sure why. Maybe it was because the first single that came out was a re-recording of She's Not There. Maybe that's why it was decided to use a different name. But it was an interesting experience, and it got me back into recording again. But to answer your question, I was going home from a party once with Chris White. Chris White was driving me, and he said, "Why don't you forget this Neil MacArthur thing? Because the first single with dear old Neil MacArthur was a small hit." And so I rather got stuck with that name for about a year. And Chris said, "Why don't you forget this Neil MacArthur thing? Go back to your real name. And Rod and I have got a production company. Let us produce you, and you can record your first solo album." And that's what happened. And I was really fortunate because Rod Argent and Chris White were producing. Peter Vince, a wonderful recording engineer, was engineering in Studio 3 at Abbey Road. It's the same team as was working on Odyssey and Oracle. And there are a lot of subtle differences when you go from being in a band to being a solo artist. And it really helped me go through that transition to be working with people I was really familiar with that were at the top of their game. And they really helped me in those early days. And the first album was called One Year, and there was a track on there by Denny Lane. And it was recorded with a 21-piece string orchestra. It's very, very unusual, with a great string arrangement by Chris Gunning. And it was a really big hit in the UK. And if you were to hear that, I don't think you would think of it as being um, a commercial track, but it's a wonderful song. It's a great arrangement, and obviously with the people involved in it, it was recorded very well. And yeah, it went on, and it was a big hit. So suddenly I'm back. I'm as a solo artist, I'm up and running, you know. My first tour was actually the first ELO tour. So it was their first tour, and I was second on the bill to them, which was a great way to start the solo career. I never thought that I would be recording again. A lot of these things, there's so much chance in life, I think. And certainly there has been in my life. Um, and I look back and I think that was really fortunate the way that came together.
What did it mean for you to revisit One Year in 2021 and unearth the additional material and demos on it?
Well, that was a real experience. It wasn't my idea. It came out as a double album, didn't it? One Year and then the other side of it. Um, I wasn't sure how people would react to that. It's very interesting for me to hear not even demos, they're just sketches, they're just ideas of songs. It was very interesting for me. I wasn't sure if how the public would react to that because some of those songs are not really fully formed songs. They are just very much ideas. But in actual fact, people seem to really like that. And a lot of the reviewers commented on it, how interesting it was. So I was really pleased that they did view it like that. From my point of view, I could understand why I would be interested in hearing those, but I wasn't convinced that the public would be interested. But from what I can gauge, most people have really enjoyed it, and in fact, it led to me um, playing 1 year in its entirety last year. I did a short run of gigs, 4 or 5 gigs, where we played 1 year from beginning to end. And in the last concert, which was at the Union Chapel in London, we recorded it and made a DVD of it. And that's coming out in November in a box set. So there's a DVD, CD, and a big booklet of featuring that last concert at the Union Chapel. And it was a wonderful experience to play that album live. Quite challenging because there's lots of different kinds of music on there. And 1 minute you're playing a rock and roll tune, and the next minute you're playing a Bartok-esque string arrangement of a very intimate, beautiful, romantic song. Um, so you have to wear lots of hats when you play that live.
Now, I understand you've been loosely exploring how the Zombies could theoretically continue as a recording act, given that Rod can no longer tour. What are your thoughts about what could occur?
Well, I think a lot depends on Rod, really. He's very well, he's fine, and he wants to keep writing and he wants to keep recording. So we just have to see how that develops. Um, he's in remarkably good shape, um, but just in some respects, um, a lot of it, what happens with the Zombies now, relies on how he feels about the future. I don't think the Zombies are ever going to tour again, um, but it could be that we will record. But it's kind of in his hands, really. And I've always maintained a solo career the whole time the Zombies have been together. And so I've kind of reactivated my solo career as the Zombies have stopped touring. I've concentrated more on this side of things. It happens that there's been a Zombies documentary, and there are 4 Zombies albums going to be released this year. So I've been very active in promoting that product. But in terms of writing, recording, and touring, I have been concentrating on my solo career really, while we find out what's going to happen with the Zombies. It will, whatever happens, it'll evolve naturally, or it might be that that's we've recorded our last song. I don't know. I hope.
Um,
I ho-
please.
no, I said I hope we will record some more. I really do.
Well, I think a lot of people would share that sentiment. The documentary ends with stating that the friendships in the band are ultimately what's most important. What enabled you all to remain good friends without the fractious politics and struggles that have impeded most legendary bands?
Um, well, it's probably just down to our personalities, really. I think we're all fairly easygoing people, and the music business is like lots of other businesses, is quite demanding, and you have to find your own way to get through the challenges that the music business sets up for you. And so, speaking personally, I like to just be very philosophical about being in a band, recording, writing. Otherwise, there's so many bumps in the road that you could become a nervous wreck if you take that side of things too seriously. So I like to work with people who are very easygoing, talented and driven, of course. in some respects, but easygoing people. And when these difficulties come up, there's always a way through it. I don't want to get into fights with people, and it's very easy in bands, with the pressures of backstage and big shows coming up and things like that. Small things become big things, and it's easy to get caught up in those things. But there's no one in the band that has that kind of temperament. We just all work towards writing the best songs, recording to the best of our ability, and playing the best shows we can. That's the important thing. And just ignore all the noise that goes around it to the best of your ability.
All right. Well, my very last question for you is tell me about your personal drive to remain so creative, active, and moving forward at this point in your life.
Well, I enjoy writing songs. I enjoy what I do. There's an old saying, isn't there? If you enjoy what you're doing, you'll never do a day's work in your life. And that's how I feel about my career. It's I would do this if I wasn't making records. I'd still stay at home writing songs. So it's just what's natural to me. It's not, I don't have to work at it. This is just natural for me. And I enjoy every moment of it.